About a year ago, I started focusing on fishing with crankbaits, and in this video, I'm going to share with you what I've learned. Number one, have a system for experimenting with different crankbaits. By this, I basically mean just have different crankbaits tied on to different rods, and definitely use some strategy when picking out your crankbaits ahead of time so that you don't have to spend your fishing time tying on different lures to the same rod. Don't choose all shallow running crankbaits or all deep running crankbaits. Have some variety in what you've picked out ahead of time. Number two, there are rules for lure color. In clear water conditions, natural color patterns usually work better. A ghost shad or baby bass pattern works really well for me when the water's clear. In murky or stained water conditions, I've found that crankbaits that have a little bit of contrast work really well. Black and chartreuse, for instance, is one of my all-time favorites. Just so you know, you can find some of these lures tagged in the description below. And if you have a favorite crankbait color, make sure you tell me in the comments below. Number three, long casts are usually better than short casts. A longer cast means your lure is in the water a longer period of time. This means more fish could potentially see your lure and you have a better chance of getting a bite. Now this concept is true for most lures, but it's especially true for crankbaits. And the reason why it's especially true for crankbaits is crankbaits have to travel a certain distance before they get down to their running depth. Number four, use swivels sometimes, but not every time. In low visibility situations, you can get away with a little more hardware on your setup. This means that if you anticipate that you're going to be switching out a lot of different crankbaits on multiple rods, it may be best to use a swivel to save you time. But in clear water conditions, fish can see that swivel and it's probably best to avoid using it and just tying directly on to the lure. Number five, use cover wisely. Now we all know that bass orient themselves to structure in one way or another in most situations. In most conditions, you can get your crankbait pretty close to that structure without having problems. I've had a lot of success getting crankbaits down close to the bottom and even bumping them off of stumps and fallen tree trunks. Two situations that I had difficulty with my crankbait actually running into cover are fallen tree limbs that have a lot of small branches, and then of course submerged weed beds. Crankbaits get hung up on both of these kinds of structure, so it's best to try to get close but not too close. Hey, if you like to fish, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. It's a completely free way for you to support me. I really would appreciate it. Thanks. Number six, know your depths. It's important to know how deep the water is where you're fishing, especially if you're fishing a crankbait or trying to fish a deep running or medium running depth crankbait. One other depth factor that's helpful to know is how deep the fish are holding up. I recently had a video where I was going to run a Rapala ShadRap, but that was actually deeper than the fish were. The fish were stacked up only about 2, 3, 4 feet below the surface. I ended up running an Arky 220, and that Arky caught me 3 fish in short order. I ran a Rapala ShadRap next to the rod that I was running the Arky 220, and I didn't get a bite on the ShadRap all day long. Now don't get me wrong, I love the ShadRap. I've caught a lot of nice fish on the ShadRap, but that day it just wasn't working with the ShadRap because the ShadRap was running too deep. I guess I say all this to say that it's helpful to have a fish finder if you can. If you don't have a fish finder, it's really important to know how deep your crankbaits are running. That way you know if you're running an 8-foot crankbait and you're not getting any bites on it, switch it up. Go with something more shallow. Go with something deeper. Figure out where the fish are, either by using a fish finder or by just throwing a different variety of crankbaits. Number seven, sound is important. Now, most crankbaits that I've ever bought have some kind of rattling mechanism inside of them, whether it's little BBs or little beads or something that's inside a hollow or a semi-hollow body, and that creates some kind of a rattle sound. Every now and then you'll run across a crankbait that does not have a rattle. I don't really like these as much. I know it's a more subtle presentation for the fish, but I don't think these work as well for me personally. And I know there's situations where a more subtle presentation might be good, but it just hasn't really worked for me. This particular crankbait here is a silent runner, or whatever they're called. This is a Rapala crankbait. It has a great action and a great pattern, but no rattle. Number eight, play with your speed. When I really first started looking into fishing with crankbaits, I know I was retrieving my crankbaits too fast. As soon as I slowed down my retrieval, I started getting bites. And that's with bass, crappie, and panfish. Now I know there's times when burning a lure is effective, and that means retrieving it really, really fast to the water. But for me, burning, I haven't caught a whole lot of fish with burning, maybe a couple. Usually I just have better luck with a nice, slow retrieval around cover. Number 9, know when to quit. If you're fishing crankbaits and just not getting bites, don't be afraid to switch it up to a different kind of lure. It's not uncommon for bass to kind of turn their nose up at a moving baits for whatever reason, but then hit a worm or maybe a jerk bait, something that has pauses and twitches, or something that's jigged off of the bottom. So if crankbaits aren't working, they're just not working. Try something else. Now hold up a second. If you watch this video all the way through and you think I missed something, tell me in the comments below. I want to hear your opinion. What crankbaits work for you? What's your favorite crankbait? Is there one that you don't like that everybody else likes? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about it.